Welcome to RPG Community College. Today I thought I would share with everyone my plans for my starter build for the new Path of Exile League, Scourge, which is looking so good. The game is getting so many good changes, and in a lot of ways it kind of feels like we're going to be playing a new game, especially because of the passive tree, which has also pretty much rendered a lot of build guides just completely useless. So I thought I'd throw mine out there and give people more options for just like their choice in league starts, or maybe even just show people some tricks that they can use in their own builds. So yeah, let's just take a look at the POB here. And a link to this will be down in the description, of course. But the first thing I'd say about this path of building is that you want to ignore the total DPS calculation that path of building does, because it is completely wrong. If you want a more accurate estimation of what your damage is going to be, you're going to want to add the average hit damage of the spell portion of Detonate Dead together with the corpse explosion portion of the damage, and then multiply that by the amount of corpses that you're exploding every second. And for this build, that's going to be 18. So we'd have about 53,000 damage times 18, which ends up being about 950k serious DPS, which isn't too bad for a build that's invested less than an Exalt total into its gear. So while we won't have problems fighting Conquerors or doing Maven invitations and whatnot, that isn't really one of the main reasons I want to play the build. I want to play Detonate Dead because of just how good it feels to map with it and how much clear speed it has. Using Detonate Dead with Spell Cascade and Unleash makes it so that every time you cast the skill, you basically just blow up the entire screen, which creates a very satisfying playstyle. And because of all the AoE that Detonate Dead has, it makes the skill great at clearing maps. And when you're starting out in a new league, mapping is what you're going to be doing like 95% of the time. There's also the league mechanic to think about. When you shift into the Scourge dimension, the more monsters you kill, the faster you're going to be able to Scourge your items. So the better you are at clearing maps, the more rewarding the Scourge League is going to be for you. Another thing to consider with the Scourge League is that the longer you stay shifted into the alternate reality, the more damage you take. So you kind of got two choices. You can never get hit, or you can actually build some defense. And of course, I chose to build some defense. Since this patch came with a rework to a lot of defenses, I'm actually pretty interested in exploring the mechanics of things I haven't really done before. And there's actually a lot going on with this build defensively. And I'll try to explain it all while being as concise as I can. But a great place to start would be with Eldritch Battery. This makes it so that our energy shield protects our mana instead of our life, and we combine this with Mind Over Matter, so that when we take damage, a portion of it is taken from our life and our energy shield at the same time. 70% of the damage is going to be taken from our life, 30% from our energy shield. This helps mitigate damage, and combined with aura investment from our tree is going to allow us to reserve all of our mana into auras. I reserve Petrified Blood, Herald of Ash, Discipline, and Determination. Discipline's very easy to explain. It's just more energy shield, nothing more to it than that. There's nothing really going on with Herald of Ash either, it's just more fire damage. But there actually is something to talk about when it comes to Determination, because before 3.16, this is an aura that nobody would probably ever consider using, but with the buffs to armor making it twice as effective as it was in 3.15, and the pretty massive buffs that the Determination aura itself got, I think this is actually a very strong choice for a defensive-based aura now. On top of the more multiplier that it was giving you before, it's also going to be giving you flat armor now. And assuming they don't change the more multiplier that's currently on there, at level 20, this gem is going to be giving you 2,000 armor and a 50% more armor multiplier, which we scale even further by getting 50% increased aura effect in the tree. So on this build, it's going to be giving you 3k armor and 75% more armor multiplier. And when all is said and done with our increases from the skill tree and armor from our gear, we should be sitting at about 12,500 armor in hideout, but we also get a passive mastery that allows us to defend with 120% of our armor if we're not on low energy shield, which is essentially just another 20% more multiplier to our armor. So when we're not on low armor, we'll have about 15k armor. And something else that I highly recommend for the build is to get a unique item called Skin of the Loyal. This will eventually replace your Tabula Rasa, And one of the stats on this item is 100% increased global defenses, which is a very powerful stat to have in this build because it scales not only your armor, but also your energy shield. While you're wearing a Skin of the Loyal, you'll have about 20k armor standing around in hideout, and if you're not on low energy shield, you'll be defending with 24,000 armor. And this should give the build a very effective layer of physical damage mitigation. And since we're investing into armor, we're going to be able to take the new Keystone Divine Shield, and this should give us some decent energy shield sustain. But there's a couple of things to know about this Keystone. For one, it's new, and while I think it's going to be good, it might end up not being good, but don't worry, I do got a plan for that. And two, you're only going to regain energy shield when you get hit by physical damage. And obviously not all of the damage in the game is physical. So you're going to need some other method of gaining energy shield that isn't Divine Shield. But the question is how much should you invest into these other methods of regaining energy shield? And that's really just not something anybody knows because obviously no one's played Divine Shield before. But I do have some other methods of gaining energy shield. There's a node we take that gives us energy shield when we block spell damage. I have a small amount of energy shield leech, and I got some flat ES regen from some Abyss Jewels, which I'm pretty much just hoping that this is enough. But like I said, there's no way of knowing until we actually play the build. But I do have a backup plan if Divine Shields ends up being pretty terrible, and that's to spec out of Commander of Darkness and into Essence Glutton in the Necromancer Ascendancy, and that will just solve the problem right there. But I really don't want to do this because having Commander of Darkness is just a very nice quality of life. It gives you a little bit more damage, and that 30% all res makes gearing so much easier. And the last thing that I'm going to talk about with defenses is going to be Petrified Blood. If you don't know what this does, this can seem a little complicated, but basically what this does for the build is that when you're on low life, we're going to be dealing more damage because we have the Pain Attunement Keystone, but you're also going to be easier to kill. Then when you use a Life Flask to recover your HP up to above half, you're going to be much harder to kill. So situationally, you can trade damage for increased survivability. But now let's take a look at the items that I'm using here in the build. This is a pretty budget setup. Like, you should easily be able to put this build together for less than a result. For a weapon, we're using a Scepter with just increased damage, flat damage. Even though we're not really scaling crit, getting some crit chance is important for sustaining elemental overload. And some cast speed is always nice for self-cast build. It just makes playing the build just feel a lot smoother. Scepters like this really aren't that expensive. They drop from incursion encounters quite often, and they never really go for more than like 5 to 10 chaos at a league start. Just make sure the one you buy has an open suffix so that you can craft some cast speed onto it. For a shield, we got On's Heritage. Not only does this have a large amount of armor, it's got some pretty good life on it too. We also use 2 Fragility Crimson Jewels to bring our maximum endurance charges down to 0. And this is going to give us a permanent onslaught and plus 2% to our maximum resistances. For a helmet, we're going to be using a Bone Helmet. We grab Spiritual Aid on the tree, so any increases to minion damage are also going to affect the damage of our main skill. We use a Tabula because it's just a cheap, easy way to get a 6-link. And for the gloves here, you're going to want to get a pair of gloves that drop from Incursion that have the modifier on them 40% increased damage with hits against enemies that are chilled. I don't know how to put this item into POB, but you're definitely going to want to get this item because we get an Ascendancy passive that makes it so that the corpses that we spawn are going to chill enemies. And if you want to hit people with Detonate Dead, they have to be by the corpses, and any enemy by your corpses is going to be chilled. So these gloves are just going to be a nice 40% increase to your damage. For boots, we just look for a pair with life, move speed, and as much resistances as you can afford. For the amulet, you're going to want to get something with a lot of strength and dexterity on it. This build is really starved for dexterity, so you're probably also going to need to get a dexterity roll on your rare ring as well. But you should be able to get enough strength in your amulet not to need it anywhere else. I also chose Divine Judgment for an Anoint. It's just a budget Anoint that provides a nice damage increase. I went with a Vermilion Ring because we need life. More life is always good. And like I was saying when I was talking about the amulet, get a dex roll and just a flat life roll on here, and then as many resists as you can get. In our other ring slot, we're using a Lori's Lantern. Down in the description, I'll link to a Reddit thread where somebody explains how good this ring actually is. But the short and sweet of it is, when an enemy is unlucky when damaging you, most hits are going to be reduced by about 6% damage. and if it has a large damage range like a lightning hit, it provides about 22% damage mitigation. But at the end of the day, it is random how much Lori's Lantern is going to reduce the damage that you take, so it could not reduce the damage that you take at all, or it could reduce it by a large amount. Either way, it still provides a lot of all resistances, move speed, and a lot of cast resistance, so this is a great budget ring to include in the build. For a belt, we're using a Darkness Enthroned. This is a great budget belt that's never more than a couple chaos, because the most expensive part of this belt always ends up being the jewels, which the jewels we have here really aren't that expensive. The energy shield regen on them is basically trash for every single build besides this one, so the only thing you're going to be paying for is the life roll and the added fire damage to spells. And you don't need to get fire damage added to spells. You can get just any flat added damage to spells, but fire damage is going to be the best because you scale it the most. And you're also going to have an open suffix on these jewels, and in that open suffix you could put strength or dexterity, would be amazing, or just any resistance roll would also be really good for the build. And these jewels also shouldn't run you more than a couple chaos. We also use a Thread of Hope in this build, and it really shouldn't be too hard to get these in a trade league on like day 2 or 3 of the league, especially with the Atlas being shortened down so much. And with all the resistances that we get from the passive tree, it's really not going to hurt to buy one of the cheaper threads. You're going to easily be able to overcome the downsides of having those minus resistances. I also highly recommend upgrading your tabula into a Skin of the Loyal when you get the currency to do it. I've bought a Skin of the Loyal before for 10 chaos, and I've also bought one before for like 50 chaos. Just keep an eye on them, and when you can afford one, pick one up, because it is a very powerful upgrade for the build. And generally, when it comes to the Skin of the Loyal, the more blue sockets it has, the more expensive it gets. So if you needed to, you could swap out the Concentrated Effect Gem on Detonate Dead for Hypothermia, and you would lose a little bit of damage, but your build overall would be a lot better because you had a Skin of the Loyal instead of a Tabula. I think that's going to be it for now, though. Down in the description, I'll also have a POB for an endgame version of the build that'll have a bunch of gear in it that you may or may not ever see. We'll give you an idea of like my late game plan and give you something to grind for, but you should definitely know that right now it's more of a concept and a plan than it is like something that's solid and set in stone. It's very much subject to change depending on just how the build plays and whatnot. I'll also leave a written guide down there for leveling for people that want that information. You can swap into Detonate Dead pretty early, and it's actually a really awesome leveling skill. I think it's just better to give that information in a written guide. That way you can just like throw it into a notepad and then you have it there for league start. You don't have to be, flipping through a YouTube video when you get lost and forget what to do. But yeah, I think that's it. If you liked the video, be sure to, hit the little thumbs up button. And if you'd like to continue your education, consider subscribing to the channel. That's going to be all for now, though. I hope you learned a thing or two. I hope Scourge League is awesome and your luck is amazing. And I hope to see you soon.